He was 17 years old and he was a senior. And his name was Ed Casper. And she kept seeing him walking around, and she finally decided one day she was going to tell him that she really wanted him to paint a mural. So she got him in her classroom, and he said, no, I'm not an artist. Well, the interesting thing about him was when he was 6 years old, he had TB of the bone. And at that time, there was no cure for TB. Yeah. The only cure they had was to put you in a sanitarium for rest. So from the time he was 6 years old until the time he was a high schooler, he was in a sanitarium, in a bed. And so what he would do, he would paint. They gave him paints, and so he learned how to paint while he was in the sanitarium. So he entered Milford High School, and he decided he wanted to be a mathematician. So he was taking all kinds of math courses when Miss Mariucci told him she thought he should paint a mural, that he could paint any subject he wanted, and so he decided he wanted to do the history of mathematics. So he spent several months doing research on the history, looking at what characters he would like to have in the mural, doing all kinds of sketches, and he would do it before and after school, and sometimes when he had free periods. And Miss Mariucci knew he was a good art student, and so she encouraged him, and he was doing all these wonderful sketches, and then he finally painted the mural. It was, as you can see, it really was a very large mural. And it was painted on canvas, and it was designed to go above the blackboard in the mathematics department, which was on the second floor of Milford High School. Okay. And so he finished the mural, and everybody thought it was just beautiful. I mean, if you see it, here was somebody who really was not an art student, but he knew how to paint very well. If you look at it, you also notice how well he placed the people. And he painted the major mathematicians of the era. Mm-hmm. Unbeknownst to him, Miss Mariucci went to the Yale Art School, and she met with the head of the Yale Art School and showed him pictures of the mural. And he was very impressed. And one day, Ed was called into the principal's office and found out that he got a full scholarship to the Yale Art School. So he graduated from the Yale Art School, and he made his first sale to Vogue magazine. And from then on, he was doing covers and all kinds of things for Vogue magazine. And he ended up working for Sports Illustrated for many, many years and became a very famous artist.
So
now,
despite being initially interested in mathematics, he eventually shifted his career towards the arts?
To the arts. And so he never became a mathematician.
The rest of his life?
He was an artist for the rest of his life. And I think that shows the power of a teacher. The teacher who saw something in him that he didn't even see in himself, and encouraged him and guided him and helped him along.
Really touching story.
It really is an interesting story. And here's a boy who spent his entire childhood in bed.
Yeah,
and he learned.
She really, was able to make something special out of him.
She changed his whole life,
Yeah, that's
I mean, and she's an amazing woman. She was the head of the art department until she retired in the 70s. She went back and got her doctorate degree. She got married. She was known as Dr. Verdi. And she retired from the Milford schools, and she was always interested in artwork. And we were so pleased that when the school was closed, that they were able to take that mural off the wall, and it is now hanging in Parsons. It's really a gem of a piece.
Yeah, it's quite large, to be honest. Did you know the woman, the teacher, at all? Or
no, I didn't. Unfortunately, I didn't know any of them.
So she worked around the same areas as you, or where did she work out of?
She worked out of Milford High School.
Okay,
she was in Milford High School her entire career. She started when she was a young teacher, came to work in Milford, and stayed in Milford until she retired in 1979.
Oh, okay, so it was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
So she was not really around the same time that you
No,
were.
and she has since passed away also.
Yeah. I mean, it was quite a long time.
Yeah, I mean, she was very interested in the artwork in Milford, and we're very pleased to have this as part of the permanent art collection.
It's a really great piece.
It really
Yeah.
is a lovely
There's a lot of-
painting.
lot of
It's
interesting
interesting
parts
too, because if you look at the mural, he did, you see that there are people who are really well painted there,
Yeah.
fully painted, and then there are some sketchier figures. The paintings that are painted, fully painted, are personages.
Yeah.
The ones that are the sketchier figures they're like the surveyors and other people who worked in mathematics,
Yeah, but who weren't directly.
but who were
you know,
not directly part of those
mathematicians per se.
large, important people in the field of mathematics.
Yeah, of course. That's quite interesting that he would depict everybody differently, you know, depending on their status in the mathematical world. Do you know if there was any particular reasoning behind the specific formulas that he added, or do you think that they were?
I don't know. I wish I had known the artist, and I wish we had been able to talk and find out exactly what was going on in his mind when he did that. I mean, he spent a lot of time thinking about what was going to be in that mural, and it hung for many years, from the 1940s until the school was demolished, until they built the new high school, and it was turned into apartments finally. But it hung in the mathematics department for all those years for everybody to look at while they were taking their math courses.
Wow, that would have been really interesting to take a test in.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
Can I interject a question? Could you speak to whatever other artwork you know that the student had done? You mentioned that he painted Joseph.
I can't hear you.
If you could speak to the other artwork that you know that the artist did, like the picture of Joseph Foreign, maybe like just reference some of the
Oh
work
yes,
that he did.
I will
Did
do
you
that.
the one out front, or the one
no,
in the
one in
office?
Parsons.
Oh, the one in
I'd say.
Parsons. Okay, not the one here.
I don't know who painted the one here. That's a good. We have one
Okay.
that hangs downstairs in the library. We
Yep.
don't know who painted that.
No, I don't. There is another painting right next to this painting. There is a painting of Joseph Foreign,
Yeah.
the superintendent for whom the school was named. It was also done by Ed Casper, but later in life he came back and
Yeah.
did that portrait of Joseph Foreign, for whom that school was named. And that's interesting to see what he painted like later in life after he had done a lot of other kinds of portraits, particularly of sports figures. He was a very important person in the field of sports arts in a time when, you know, sports arts is quite new. And so he was a very important person in the early years of sports artwork.
What would you say are some different? I'm trying to word this correctly. How would you say his work of Mr. Foreign differs from his earlier work on the mural?
Well, I think it's a much more mature painting than the early work. If you look at how he painted the ones in the murals, to how he painted Joseph Foreign, it's a much more mature painter. He really is a very interesting man. I wish I had known him.
What year did he pass away?
I think it was in the late 70s or early 80s. He came back and was very interested in trying to help us preserve some WPA art that has been lost. I mean, we had some wonderful WPA art that was in some of the rooms of the schools, and he was very interested, and particularly there was one in the Milford Firehouse that was lost when the building. He said it was there, but we have not been able to find it. Apparently it was painted over. And he was very concerned about it when he found out that some of the WPA art that were on walls of schools that were no longer in use were not being preserved.
Yeah.
So he was very interested in the arts all the way until he died, and came back to Milford often to look and help preserve what we have in the arts field here.
Yeah, it seemed like he was quite. It seemed like he was quite passionate for the arts and stuff, despite, you know, coming to it relatively. Well, how old was he when he originally depicted it?
He was
Yes.
6 years old when he went into the
Yeah,
sanitarium.
and then he was 17 when he depicted
He was
it.
17 when he
And
painted the
he had never
picture.
had any,
He had never had any real art training. I mean, it was just, apparently it was happenstance of having to, because at those days they used to keep them in beds, and they were in the sanitarium, and a lot of times they would move the beds out to the sunshine because the sunshine was supposed to be good for the patients with TB. And so they were in bed all the time. They were not walking around, particularly when you had TB of the bone.
yeah, so he would sit around.
He was bed, you know, and that's how he passed his time. He learned how to paint.
a really interesting way. That's in the 1930s. Yeah.
In the late 30s, early 40s.
Okay. Okay.
So it was a long time ago, but you know, things have changed. I think these days, if you have TB of the bone, you don't spend all those years from when you were 6 until you entered high school. That's a long time to be spending in a sanitarium.
Yeah, I mean, medicine is advancing.
You referenced the WPA artwork. Some people may not know what that is if they're viewing the arts. Could you just speak to that briefly? The WPA?
Sure. There was a period of time starting around 1932 when there was a project called the Works Progress Administration during the Depression time. It was a program that Franklin Roosevelt put into place, and it paid artists and painters and poets and people who are in the arts field to do work. And in Milford, what you needed to do was the artists would get accredited, and then the town would pay the money for the paints, and the federal government gave money for the wages. So it was a program that was with the federal government and with the state government and with the local government. And Milford at that time had several murals that were painted in school buildings around town. Many of those buildings, however, are no longer being used as schools, and so we're still in the midst of trying to save some of that WPA artwork that is around town.
What are some examples locally that still exist?
Well, we have one that we're in the midst of raising money to try to restore right now. It used to hang in the lobby of the Central Grammar School. It hung there for about 40 years, and if you speak to people in town even today, they'll tell you they remember going into school and seeing that mural on the wall every day when they walked into school. The school was demolished in the 1980s, and a fragment of it was saved by the person, Bill Medic, who was the executive director of the Arts Council, and Fred Vespi, who was in charge of the art department in the Milford schools. And so we have a fragment of it. It's called You Shall Pass This Way But Once, and it shows students in school, and it shows a church, and it shows a couple of old buildings in Milford. They were part of this mural, and we're trying to raise money to restore the mural. There are also some murals that are still hanging in what used to be the old Devon School that is now Kingdom Hall. There are murals in the hallway there that depict the early settlers of Milford and the purchase of Milford from the Indians, as well as some at Fanny Beach School that that were done by Wendell Austin, who is another wonderful artist who lived in Milford, and they depict fairy tales. So we're very lucky that we have so many. We also have 4 or 5 that we know used to be, but we can't find them. So we're still in the midst of looking for those and seeing if we can find them somewhere. Hopefully, one day we will find them.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of these pieces of artwork seem to depict Milford in its earlier stages. So you would argue that the artwork is a huge part of Milford's history and culture, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the artwork clearly tells you something about Milford in its early days. I mean, it was a purchased from the Indians. It was a farming community, so one of the murals that's now in Kingdom Hall depicts the farmers at work. They're very interesting historical pieces that remind us what this town used to be like.
Yeah, it's a great, snippet of the past.
Yes.
You get to see, to see how different,
right,
grown as a community and people over, well over 400 years now.
Well, we're lucky that we still have some farmers in town, however. We're lucky that we still can buy fresh produce, so some of the early days of Milford is still well and alive here.
Yeah, it's nice that we still have.
Yes, it is nice.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. What is the mood that you personally got from seeing this mural, like whenever you see it in person or whatnot?
Well, I think it's interesting that somebody who was so interested in mathematics took the time and went back and looked at who were the greats in the field, and then figured out a way to position them and show their personalities, because you can really tell their personalities from the way he painted them. When you think about it, I mean, he was a 17-year-old kid, and he did all his surveying and looking apparently through historic records, because there are some of those mathematical greats, we're not even sure what they look like. So he had to go back and look at what people thought those people looked like, and also depicted them in clothing of the era where they lived. So you get a mood of, I find it very kind of cerebral to see them. They're in their robes and they're carrying their work with them. It's a very, I like the painting. I go look at it often, because I think it's it's a wonderful depiction of a group of historic mathematical leaders in our history. And to think that it was done by a young man who had not had a lot of training, I think is really remarkable.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that he did all this research, especially without the internet or any quick way to get the information.
Well, and the other thing is that he was not in art class, so he was doing this besides doing his regular work at school. He was president of the class, and so he was doing it before school, he was doing it after school. His art teacher often told other art students to go watch him paint. So apparently there used to be a time when a lot of the kids who were in the art class would go watch Eddie painting. And you can understand why. I mean, just look at the columns that he did. Just look at what the painting looks like. He really has an enormous amount of talent.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how long it actually took him to create this?
He started at the beginning of the school year when she got him to decide that he wanted to do it, and it was finished by the end of the school year, because he got the scholarship. He was still in school when he got the scholarship, so it must have been done before school ended that year. Mm-hmm. So it was really probably, how many months, 9 months or whatever time school is in session, and at the beginning he had to make all the sketches and everything, so, but it was a year's project for him.
Yeah, it's really amazing that he can create such a large mural in such a quick time.
A very short period of time.
You'd have other artists who might take years to create.
Well, and I think if you think about it, somebody who did not really know art that well, that he was able to think about the painting, to research it, to make the sketches for it, and to actually paint it in that short period of time, I think is a real outstanding. I'm sure that's why Miss Marucci decided that she needed to go to Yale and make sure that he was not going to be lost to art. And that's the other thing. I just think it shows you the power of one teacher and the power of one student, and what can happen if somebody takes somebody under their wing. I think it's just such a wonderful story. I love to tell the story.
Yeah, it's a really great story, honestly.
Mrs. Pellegrino and I were just wondering if you found if there was how much of an influence the era had. Like, it was 40s, I think we just entered the war. Did that have any bearing on the mood or the tenor of the time that might have influenced his work?
Well, I think there was, during the 1940s, there was a lot of attention being given to murals, and because of the WPA art. And so I think maybe that did have some influence on him, because at the time there were murals being painted when he was growing up. There were murals being painted around in many communities around, and so I think it might have had some influence on this work. I also think that as he grew as an artist, he expanded into the sports field, and that was something that was growing at the time. It was a time, I mean, we did not know anything about sports art at that time. And the fact that he went into the magazine business and did magazines for Vogue and some of the other women's magazines, and then from there went on to Sports Illustrated, which was a new magazine at the time. It was a great opportunity for him and a great opportunity for a sports art. He's well known as a sports artist in his later years.
Well, this is kind of interesting because my mom and dad were born the same time. Like they were actually maybe a little bit younger than him. Like they were born right around 1940, 41 in that era. And I remember they remarked a lot that TV was really not a big thing. Not everybody had TVs.
Yes.
When you did, you only had black and white, and
Yep.
people would gather around. You know,
Right.
a lot different. So the medium,
Yes.
the written medium was much more prevalent and influential.
Oh yeah,
in society.
the fact that there was not a lot of other things to do, there was not TV, there weren't a lot of movies to go see. The art was much more important, I think, than it is now, because that was the medium of expression for so many people who were in the art world. You needed to paint if you were going to do anything. So I think that the fact that we didn't have a lot of other distractions made the art of painting more important than it is at the present time.
Kind of a random question, but you know the quote on it that says, "Let no man go ignorant of geometry enter here," along the mural.
It is on the mural, but I do not know where that came from.
Okay, you're not sure whether the
No.
it was said by a famous.
No,
individual that-
I do not, but
Okay.
I bet you we could probably find that out. I don't know. I've never looked it up to see who said that. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I might have read too many books, but I think that a lot of these heavy hitter mathematicians of the time were more the aristocracy of the time. It wasn't really like everyone was educated in those eras, and I think many of them, education I think might have been only for select people. That was maybe even in-house or in tight circles of mathematicians. So I bet you, I'm wagering if we look it up, and I'll go take a look at it in a minute.
It'll be interesting to look it up to see what it is.
Doubt it even a little bit.
And I'm sorry, I think you answered the question before, but the artwork itself, it's not what is currently the Parsons complex. It's not that Milford High School, right? Was it, you said it was Central Grammar School?
No, this one was in Milford High
And then it was
School.
This was
moved the
so this is the current Parsons, the physical building?
No, it was in that yellow building. The yellow building that's the apartments.
The apartments now.
That was the Milford High School at the time.
The original Milford High School.
And they tore it down and built some apartments.
That quote, "Let no man ignorant of geometry enter here." We're looking it up. But
Oh, good.
Well, I wish you'd known the artist personally, or he was still with us. But do you have any idea whether he was interested in history or not? Because it seems like he must have had some idea of the history behind them to research.
Well, I would think so, but I don't really know that. I do wish I knew him, and I did find that he has a son who is down at the University of Maryland, who's a physician at the University of Maryland. And I would like to see if I could get a hold of him and find out if he knows anything more about his father and the painting that his father did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be really interesting.
It would
to
be
see
interesting
somebody
to know
who'd
that.
actually known him quite personally.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
That
It
would
would
be
be
good.
nice to know a little bit more about him.
That would be, that would be very nice to have his recollections of his father,
Yeah.
his father's work.
His father's work, and
Yeah.
because some of his art paintings are in the sports museums, so I know that he was certainly very well known in the sports art world.
Yeah.
He became a real sports artist. So that, from this, it's interesting that he went into sports art. This is the way he started out, isn't that
'cause
interesting?
They would go from
Yeah. From mathematics.
geometry and-
But see, he wanted to be a mathematician. That was his interest at the time.
Mhm.
And that's why he chose the subject, because he really he thought he was going to go into the field of mathematics, and that's why he chose the subject.
When you talk about sports art, can you describe that a little bit more to anybody who doesn't have an understanding about it?
Well, a lot of the sports art is done outside. While they'll do golfers, or they'll do tennis players. It's a whole field of doing sports athletes and doing artwork that is for the sports world. And now that there's so much work on that in the magazines and on television, it's an entire field of its own that came out, I mean, really from having, TV is probably what has made the sports arts field bigger than what it was. That's how Sports Illustrated started. And so it is a growing and a relatively new field.
So he would paint certain scenes?
Oh yeah, he painted a lot of golfers, he painted tennis players, and they were used on the covers of, or inside the magazines. That's where he went. He worked for Sports Illustrated for many years.
Yeah, it shows a lot that they would choose a painting, and instances where they could have chosen a photograph possibly, you know, that they thought a painting does a better job at representing a scenery, or, you know, whatever they need to convey, I suppose.
Yeah, but a lot of people, like, you know, they wanted sports paintings to hang in their houses. They rather than the photographs, they wanted a painting of the performer, of the athlete.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. Do you have any, or do you know any particular famous covers, like years or whatnot, of Sports Illustrated that he did, or any other magazines?
Well, there are some. There are a couple of the paintings he did for Sports Illustrated that are in the Sports Museum, and so he had some very famous paintings that people have bought of his.
So he would do. He would paint covers throughout, like, the 80s, you would say, or the 90s? Or?
No, he was in.
Sorry,
it had to be in the
60s.
Because see, he went in school. He graduated, so it was really starting in the 50s and 60s and 70s that he was painting most of the time.
Sorry, I shifted the
Yeah.
line a little bit.
Yeah, because he
Passed away in the 70s. Okay. Well, maybe we'll do this way. Somebody else said a lot of the questions are pretty similar. I think we're starting to run out of them. Is that
I was curious, what were the sports? Like, I know golf and maybe baseball, but beyond that, what else was going on? What were
They did tennis. They did, you know, any of the athletics that are in the Olympics.
Oh, yeah,
So that it's, you know, they do swimmers, they do all kinds of sports. People.
really well diverse? Okay. So I think we've ran through most of the questions, actually. I mean, the rest of them that I had would be like personal ones where she would kind of have to know him, like things like whether he was, like, the artist was interested in certain
I'm so
things.
interested to know which mathematician is which.
Yeah.
Now, I guess we were able to infer by the.
There is right next to the painting, there is a sketch, and it tells you which person is whom. If you go to Parsons and see it in person.
Yeah.
I don't think we took a picture of that, as a matter of fact. Did
No,
we?
we
Did I give you that? No. But there is a picture, you know, a little sketch, and it says which mathematician is which.
What I really love about, I was just talking to Ms. Pellegrino about it a little bit, was I just love how interconnected everything was. Math wasn't a separate subject from art.
Yep.
Which wasn't, and I was talking with oh my God, but Max, and I had a mental freeze there. I was talking about Max a little bit, but I think the whole context under which the mathematicians looked at the world during their time was much more comprehensive and inclusive of many topics. It was philosophy, it was
Well, it was.
engineering,
It really
a lot
was.
of things rolled into one.
I mean, I think they were seen as the philosophers of the time, not a mathematician as you would think of a mathematician today.
Right. And that's where it was, like, whole schools, like, were centered around it. And then I think he was saying, I think it was Pythagoras wasn't just math. All we know about Pythagoras nowadays from math classes is the Pythagorean theorem.
Yep.
And just maybe Euclidean planar geometry. You know, just really brief stuff. But it was just so much more robust what he
Yep.
was really talking about. He
Yep.
was part of a whole context that was much broader, and I think it was very interesting.
Well, and when you take a look, you were talking earlier about Da Vinci. When you take a look at what Da Vinci did, and the kinds of work he did as a mathematician, as well as the kinds of things he did as a painter, he was a very broad thinker. You know, he was doing things like thinking about the airplane, and he was thinking about how do you go down underwater, and besides doing his paintings. I mean, that was really interesting.
No, it's not a good thing. You can wait.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, I think with Da Vinci, I think he was actually so good about it. The technology of his time was really what limited him. His
Yep.
ideas came to fruition. I think was it Igor Sikorsky? I think he said he didn't invent the helicopter, or he made the first flying one, or something.
But he did the pictures you see of his sketches were way before anybody thought about helicopters, and they look like helicopters.
Right.
I mean, he really was very far ahead of his time, and he wrote a lot of things backwards because he didn't want anybody to steal it. So he would write backwards, and you'd have to look in a mirror to read what he wrote. He could write backwards. I mean, it's an interesting man.
It was so interesting. They even wove that into the Da Vinci Code with was that Dan Brown?
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it because I was reading the book, and they're trying to crack the code.
Yep.
And I was like, look, I don't get it. It's like, how do you figure this out? And then they gave it away. You had to
turn it around and put it in the mirror.
Yes,
or turn it over. Yeah.
He was so clever.
Yeah, he really was a very clever guy.
And I also wondered too. They had the well, again, it's the culture was you had to hide some of your mathematics or some of your science because if it conflicted with the church or other things, then you could get yourself in hot water.
I mean, a lot of them got in trouble because they were saying things that the church didn't agree with.
Right, so that gave a whole nother context to the. And you were talking about Galileo, right? Is that who you mentioned?
Yeah, Galileo is who I was thinking of too, because he got in big trouble because he was saying things that the church did not think was true, and
he got imprisoned, I think.
Yeah.
House arrest.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Well, I'm wrong, even though I'm right."
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of them did that. But
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. It was a wonderful
Thank
interview.
you so much for.
Oops.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. I'm so glad we got an opportunity.
Oh, I'm glad we got to do it.